If you were to think about prominent SoFi executives, generally you think about Anthony Noto and his tenure. More recently, you might think of Chris Lapointe and his reputation and what he's doing for the company. But a name that most people don't automatically jump to is Derek White. He is, of course, the CEO of Galileo and probably, in my opinion, the most tech savvy individual at that company today. More so than the CTO of SoFi right now, just given from a lot of his talks online and his vision for where he's driving Galileo as a company. Derek White recently gave an interview on the Banking Transformed podcast, and I thought the insights were so impactful of him talking about what the future of banking is going to look like, where the interaction models are going to go, putting the customer at the center of that experience, and how to be a digital first bank and how to transition existing legacy banks into thinking of a digital experience for consumers. And this recent interview that Derek White gave, in my opinion, was so impactful that I reached out to Jim on the Banking Transform podcast and got his permission to make a supercut of the footage. And I've cut down over an hour of footage to about 15 minutes of time-stamped highlights. And I would urge everybody who is a SoFi investor to give it a listen, because I think that it really puts an interesting framing on the ecosystem benefits that SoFi is striving to provide and how Galileo plays a fundamental role into that. It gives perspective into what management and executives at SoFi and Galileo are thinking about the future of the business. Let's jump right into it.
My career has been really at the intersection of people and technology and money. First part of my career was in payments and financial services. We had a very successful exit of one of the very first internet banks. We started the world's first internet bank, according to Clayton Christensen, called Wingspan. And the second one was we raised $20 million from Bill Gurley at Benchmark and created a bank called Juniper. We sold that to a British company that was looking to increase their presence in the United States, and that was Barclays. And with that exit, they asked for one person to move across the pond. I told my wife it'd be 6 months, and that turned into 15 years with Barclays. And then I got a call from a guy that happened to be the number one banker in the world at the time, was the chairman of BBVA. And he said, will you come to Spain and lead the future of the company? We moved the family then to Spain. So that culminated in about 14, almost 15 years overseas. After we got back to Utah, I helped Andy Cesari and the team at US Bank become a bit more digital, and then worked with Thomas Curry and the crew at Google Cloud to set up their financial services cloud, and then took over Galileo. It was a founder-led business for 20 years and handed over to run and to scale Galileo, a little Utah company, and taking it global.
Your terminology is working what's above the glass and also looking at what's below the glass. Explain that for those who haven't been familiar with our previous discussions on this topic.
Having worked with large-scale financial institutions all over the world, just found the terminology when working with businesses and to bring people together to talk about what is the experience that we want to enable for the end user, regardless of who that human user is, whether it's a corporate banker, whether it's an employee. It's ultimately a human that is engaging in an experience, interacting in some way with money. And there's three primary interaction models that we can come on to and talk about at some point. But the concept of the above the glass experience versus what is the technology and the environment that sits below the glass that enables those experiences. Prior to COVID, about 50% of the financial institutions in the United States allowed you to open a checking account online. COVID dramatically accelerated the availability of features and functionality to a point where largely most financial institutions in the United States now have a functional mobile or glass experience for consumers. Consumer banking is much more advanced than institutional or corporate banking when it comes to enabling that glass experience. But the term above the glass and below the glass is to help bring people in an organization together to understand above the glass, we're really looking at who the end human user is. COVID has advanced that functionally. And the reason I run the company that I run now and chose to come run this company is I believe over the next 7 to 10 years, the glass experience for the end user, much of that's going to go away because the glass experience will continue for some, but it's looking beyond the glass. And in order to enable that next wave of experience, you have to improve to below the glass technology and environment.
Why is it so difficult for organizations to actually, they buy into the concept, they buy into digital banking, they buy into simplicity, authentication, automation. Why is it so hard to move from where we are to where we can be in today's marketplace?
Part of it is looking at product versus human. If you really boil it down to the experience of how a big ecosystem, a digital business builds their business versus how a financial institution builds and manages and runs their business, it's about looking at that human interaction in a very, very, very different way. A typical large financial institution will have 4 big businesses. It's consumer banking business, it's payments business, a wealth management business, and a corporate and institutional bank. Those are hugely siloed P&Ls, and the P&Ls roll up into a quarterly reporting. Those P&Ls then break down to 50 to 80 P&Ls across a business. Each one of those P&L owners has responsibility for delivering their P&L. And it's not uncommon to walk into a financial institution and they refer to the customer as the product, meaning they have a credit card. But the debit card is in a different business. And ultimately, it's one human that sits on top of those products. And the end goal is to ultimately design an end user experience that is beautiful for the end human user. How do you design those end human user experiences when managing a complex organization with P&Ls that are largely product oriented? One way to do that is dramatically change the organizational structure. Very few people actually want to do that. It's ultimately changing the mindset and training people to think like digital organizations do, and starting to measure things very differently. And all of this can be learned if you're measuring the right kinds of things. Bankers spend an enormous amount of time looking at basis points movement on billions of balance sheets. But the currency of the future isn't just financial currency. The currency is the way human interactions are changing and have changed, and focusing on basis points of movement on those interactions that are the leading indicator of monetization is the way to start to change that overall experience. And educating the organization can be designed in a way that is around the end human user more so than just monetizing through a financial product.
It's rethinking the entire process of what we've done in the past. However, the reality of the situation is that those employees who run those back office areas have been with a financial institution, bank or credit union or wealth management company for literally decades. Because to get seniority, you'd have to be there for a while. So the most stable, most secure, most important people in that process are people that have been very successful and have not really changed the way they've done things. How do you work with legacy groups that have not been unsuccessful, do not really know the pain of the consumer of the future?
We are a digital platform today that digital businesses are built on. But increasingly, a big part of our business is now helping to transform these legacy organizations into digital powerhouses, because they're looking at who did all of these digital banks in the United States build their business on. They're built on our platform. And it starts with painting a vision of what the potential possibility is and understanding the language of the organization. And how do you marry the end human user experience with the P&L? The P&L is an output of human interactions. And somewhere between the human interaction and the P&L is a product that monetizes that human interaction. So it's painting a vision of what that end human user experience can be. But then the biggest thing culturally is finding the believers, people that want to transform, and enabling them, empowering them, giving them the space and the oxygen to actually create. But it's doing it not at wholesale program transformation level. It starts with finding the believers and doing one thing and doing it amazing. And after you do that and you ship product and it has impact and it is amazing and people feel it and see it, then it starts to get more believers and you get more and more believers.
How do you humanize the digital experience today? How do you work with those organizations to integrate the two so they still have the human aspect and the digital aspect and it actually lives beyond the glass?
You can take a banker that's been the best banker in the world for 30 years and knows nothing about digital. A typical CEO or chairman I've already talked about has had 50 to 80 P&Ls that they're looking at. They're looking at where do I invest across their spreadsheets or the cells of their business. They measure all the financial metrics. The one, very simple, first metric to measure digital maturity across all of those 50 to 80 businesses is one simple thing, and that is DIY. Can Jim, by himself, regardless of what the business is, whoever the end human user is, how much of that experience out of the top 10 things Jim wants to do can he do by himself in the glass, or does he need another human? In the technology world, they refer to that as how many humans are in the loop. At Google, we had a design principle that everything should be designed, but there's one human in the loop. And that one human in the loop is Jim. The business model of banking has shifted. Banks are, yes, incredibly important. When I was at BBVA, I ran 6,000 plus branches. And you have to look at that end user experience. There's three primary interaction models for any human that a business can be designed around. But the first is do it yourself. You then take this human experience of, do they want to interact with you? Do they want to be able to DIY? The other two interaction models, the three interaction models, and we could spend hours on this, are DIY, do it together, or do it for me. And you want to look at the evolution of the business. The very first basic element, and I'm shocked today that even in 2023, there's a multi-billion-dollar institution that's 55% DIY. It's shocking. Nubank, 100 million customers, is almost 100% DIY. At an experience level, if you take a DIY experience, does a customer want to be able to interact with you in the branch, or do they have to? And use that across every one of your P&Ls. In consumer businesses, it'll be about 80. In institutional businesses, it'll be about 30, 35%. But then you start to take that and you translate it into the P&L. In the consumer business, this human experience that is DIY is a 20% cost-income ratio business. A do-it-together model is a 60% cost-income ratio business. A do-it-for-me model, we don't know yet because we haven't really gotten there, and that's where we're going next.
We're seeing a surprising amount of advanced thinking and digitalization of the experiences at the smallest financial institution level, and we're kind of missing that mid-range. What do you account for that? Who are the easiest ones to work with?
There's probably three key ingredients, and number one starts with leadership. And does leadership recognize the fundamental shift in behavior? Because banks can sit on a legacy asset base and milk that for years. And you can just drive efficiency, and you can survive. Most financial institutions could survive for years off of their balance sheet by just optimizing efficiencies. But to truly create the future, it starts with a leader that has a vision that recognizes how human interaction has and will fundamentally change with technology. And a big part of what we're also seeing is mega brands that have hundreds of millions of customers, and their traditional business is not financial services, but the whole essence of embedded finance is to start to build and recognize that human interactions, and the majority of human interactions, have some component of a monetary element to it. If you're buying something while you're shopping, if you're buying something to go on a vacation, money touches every aspect of every business of everything on the planet. So when these big brands start to have hundreds of millions of customers on them, they look at and they study ecosystem and human interactions. They start to see, actually, are we more of a financial services and monetary business than we are a transport business or a retail business? One of our customers in Latin America, as an example, is one of the largest retailers in Latin America. They decided to build an ecosystem in a financial services business. Now the financial services business contributes more to their bottom line than their retail business. Part of it comes from, number one, leadership. Number two is how good organizations are deploying the three capitals: financial capital, human capital, and technical capital. And if they recognize how to deploy their human capital and the right kinds of human capital that they need to translate that vision into execution, that's essential. And then the third is the actual creation model itself. And how do you actually go about it? If you have the vision and you have the capitals, then it's the model to actually create that future. So you got to be able to chunk the work down into something that ships in no more than 9 months. You got to have a project that in 3 days you can assemble a team. Within 6 hours to 6 weeks at most, you have a prototype, and you're shipping product in no more than 9 months. If it's taking you more than 9 months to ship product, that's the biggest difference.
Everything's changed again. How do you see the digital experience changing from what it even is today at the best organizations you work with?
To keep it simple, we refer to it as the age of brick, the age of glass, and the age of air. Brick was the age of branches. We're now in the age of glass, and we're very soon going to be moving into the age of air. Age of air means hands-free interactions where it's more voice-enabled than touch-enabled. Touch will always be a part of our interaction model, but increasingly, AI will start to solve problems and solving and anticipating questions that we don't even have to interact with. So just as Uber is taking and anticipating and sending you prompts ahead of time, so will that happen in financial services. And that is fundamentally going to change the way that we interact with money in the future, with big brands, with big financial institutions, and within our families. Leveraging technology and the controls to be able to set guidelines and parameters to educate children in the right way. So a kid that's 12 years old can have their own bank account, and to be able to set it up so that the technology enables transactions at a specific merchant location. For example, being able to say to my daughter, she can go to 12th Street Starbucks or Subway, but not the 24th Street Starbucks or Subway, because that's a little bit far away. But to be able to set up those controls and for her to have the money available in her wallet or on her account, that technology is available, is live today, and people are using that. And it's easy to spin up that kind of capability for institutions that they don't have to build themselves.
When you look at what's going to happen in the future, maybe digital twins, maybe not, what's the likelihood that financial institutions will actually be the one that manages the identity, or will it be another type of organization? Because that's the question that's out there, because the digital identity is like the hub. Where do you see this going?
I'd give 3 models as example. No one model is going to win. Several years ago, I talked about, can banks be the big threat to big tech rather than big tech being the threat to banking? And the battleground is simply around interactions. It is the way in which organizations look at interactions. You can look at the ecosystem model of the US or Latin America or Africa, but the ecosystem model in China is notably different from the United States because of one reason, and that is regulation. China enables the big ecosystems to play in financial services more so than others. And in the United States businesses, Google's on their 5th attempt at money. Amazon keeps playing in this space, and they do partnerships with really big banks because they don't want to get into the regulated space. This line of regulation protects consumers, but it's different on every continent and in every country. So the biggest space is looking at, one, the ecosystem players. The second is look at the really big, really successful digital banks. So your question is it going to be the banks that manage identity in the future? It might be, but it might not be the banks or financial institutions as we know them today. Take Revolut and take Nubank. Their products aren't just financial services products. They started as a bank, and they're going the opposite way of the Chinese. They're building ecosystem because they're looking at who is their customer, what financial products does the customers have. As financial entities, you have insight into what those customers are spending on. And then it's a natural one-hop adjacency to start a business. It's not 7 hops away from your core business. You start to offer telco experiences. Revolut is offering telco.
We've never had that in the US.
There's the Chinese model and the US kind of ecosystem model, but that's delineated by regulation. There's the new emerging mega players of Nubank and Revolut and others. I think are just doing incredible things here. They're building ecosystem, and the ecosystem is based on interactions and monetization of interactions in a different way. Now, the third space is traditional or legacy financial institutions. And legacy financial institutions, there are a couple that actually are looking at interactions as the leading indicator of their future of their business. And the more you find an executive that is looking at the interactions of their customers, is phenomenal.
What would you give a suggestion as to what they need to do first today? Legacy company, most likely a front-facing retail banker, marketer, product developer.
If you're a legacy institution, the number one thing, because you're CEO and or chairman, especially if you're publicly traded, understand how many P&Ls do you have in your business, and then go back and measure how DIY. Number one, go back and measure how DIY your business is. It is super simple. Take the top 50 reasons why a human walks into a branch. Top 10 reasons why a wealth customer contacts your wealth management business. What's the top reasons why your customers are contacting you? Is it because they want to, or is it because they have to? Start with the top 10. It's super simple. Top 5 sales, top 5 service. Are they contacting you because they want to, they have to, or is it DIY-able? Because if Google came in, took over your business, do they look at it like Google, or Zuckerberg comes in and takes over your business, flips your business on the head and says, if I were to design this with 0 humans in the loop, 1 human above the glass, 0 humans below the glass, what does your business model look like? Because that's where we're heading. That's the first phase. That's the first step. Once you make it available, and if you're a marketer, there's the 5 A's of how to run this. Is the product available? Are customers aware of it? Are they adopting it? How amazing is the product so that they become advocates? First, it has to be available for them to be able to interact in the current and or future interaction model. Anybody can measure it. That's where you start. If you're at 30%, be alarmed. If you're at 85%, you're ready for phase 2. After you get to DIY and things are available, Then you start making it intelligent. You have to make it functionally available. Once it's available, are you getting interactions off of that? Then you start to make it intelligent. Because again, imagine Zuckerberg comes in, they come in, flip your business on its head. They immediately start to leverage the data you have today to make it intelligent. And there's 5 C's of data if you want to get into the 5 C's of data. Once you make it intelligent, then you can start to anticipate, how do you remove decisions for a customer? The biggest stress in any human's life is money. There's lots of studies on this. Not getting married, not a divorce, not a loss in family, not remodeling a house, it's money. How do you remove decisions for them? That's the world beyond the glass.